In what is now present-day Zimbabwe, used to lie Zimbabwe-Rhodesia, Africa's shortest-lived state, as well as the temporary successor to the state of Rhodesia, which takes its namesake from Sir John Rhodes. Now, you may be asking yourself, how long did this state last? Was it a legitimate nation? What was its structure? And more. Today we'll be looking at Zimbabwe-Rhodesia and its temporary transition back to Southern Rhodesia and finally the move to Zimbabwe, as well as covering all of its history. So let's jump into today's video, and please don't forget to like, subscribe and share. So let's start with a quick background. Zimbabwe-Rhodesia was the successor to Rhodesia, a widely unrecognized state, which itself had declared independence from Britain as it had previously been a British colony, under the name Southern Rhodesia, which had been self-governing with some British oversight. The British government under Prime Minister Harold Wilson had demanded Rhodesia give way to majority rule. However, Southern Rhodesian Prime Minister Ian Smith had rather opted to grant the rule on wealth instead of race, but was essentially still on race, as most of the world being primarily controlled by the 8% white minority. Due to this, negotiations reached a stalemate, and the Ian Smith Southern Rhodesian government declared their own independence. Thus, the unrecognized state of Rhodesia was established, as the international community did not recognize its independence, especially Britain, who had denounced it as an outlaw nation, which was followed by a long period of sanctions on imports and exports, blockades, a brutal internal war, declining internal stability and a lot of deaths, international pressure and more, which in turn would lead to Zimbabwe-Rhodesia being established. However, in this video, I will not be going into the entire history of Rhodesia. I will be directly covering Zimbabwe-Rhodesia. But in the next video, I will be covering the entire history of Rhodesia until its transition to Zimbabwe, so do stay tuned for that. Formally established on the 1st of June 1979, Zimbabwe-Rhodesia had been established by an internal settlement, which had been signed at Salisbury, now Harare, on 3rd March 1978 between the Ian Smith administration of Rhodesia and moderate African nationalist parties not involved in the armed resistance. This had occurred due to international pressures, sanctions placed by the International Committee on the unrecognized state of Rhodesia, which had given itself independence, political pressure from the United Kingdom, United States and South Africa, although apartheid rule South Africa had aided Rhodesia in the past, which will be covered in another video, as well as internal pressures, as Rhodesia had been involved in what is known as the Rhodesian Bush War for almost 15 years by that time, which was a very, very brutal war. This internal agreement had led to the creation of an interim government in which the native African population was included in leading positions, as this had not happened before, and it was a first. However, functions such as the armed forces, police, civil service, and the judiciary were still held by the same officials previously, who were mostly part of the white minority, which was said to be due to the demographic structure, as the upper middle class comprised mainly of the white minority at that time. One of the hopes and expectations of this transition to Zimbabwe-Rhodesia was that the sanctions placed by the International Committee would be removed, and that the state finally being recognized as a legitimate country. However, both did not happen at all. For example, the sanctions were not lifted primarily due to the fact that the Patriotic Front, which was a coalition between two parties, Zimbabwe African People's Union ZAPU and Zimbabwe African National Union ZANU, under the respective leadership of Joshua Nkomo and the future second president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, had not been part of the elections, as well as not being involved in the political process that formed Zimbabwe-Rhodesia and its political structure. The International Committee and Commonwealth did not recognize this new state and saw it in the same regard as the unilaterally self-independent Rhodesia, with the Commonwealth stating that the so-called Constitution of Zimbabwe-Rhodesia would be no more legal and valid than the UDI Constitution it replaced. During a short tenure, the unrecognized state had one election, and had adopted the Constitution of Rhodesia's unilateral declaration of independence, meaning the state had a prime minister and president, which will be covered more into the video. Zimbabwe-Rhodesia was governed by the prime minister and cabinet, who were chosen by the majority council from the 100-member House of Assembly, with a Senate of 40 members acting as the upper house, both of which would select a president, who would essentially be a figurehead in which government was conducted under their name. In regards to the legislative branch, the House of Assembly of 100 members, of which 72 were common roll members, and the electorate was every adult citizen from the majority black population. In relation to the previous administration, in which majority of members were from the white population, and very few black Africans at the time qualified to vote, due to factors such as income and education, reportedly. During the elections, Bishop Ebo Mozarewa's United African National Council, UANC, had won majority in the common roll seats. Ian Smith's Rhodesian Front, RF, won all the old voter roll seats, while Indaba Ngini Sitoli's Zimbabwean African National Union, ZANU, won 12. However, this ZANU is not to be confused with Robert Mugabe's ZANU, as the party had split into two wings that ran separately in 1975, one led by Sithole and the other by Mugabe, with Sithole's renouncing the armed struggle. Sithole's had later changed to ZANU Indonga and Mugabe's ZANU PF. The Senate of Zimbabwe-Rhodesia consisted of 40 members, consisting of various people from the old voter rolls and from the Council of Chiefs of Mashonaland and Matabeleland, with the remaining members being selected by the President under the advice of the Prime Minister. However, it's documented that although the House of Assembly had greatly changed, it had been dominated by the former political stalwarts, reportedly. In terms of the executive branch of the government of Zimbabwe-Rhodesia, as previously mentioned, it had consisted of a president and prime minister, and the president would be elected by the members of parliament. And on May 28, 1979, the two nominees were Josia Zion Gumede of the UANC and Timothy Ndlovu of the United Federal Party, UNFP. Josia Gumede had been elected as president. In terms of the Prime Minister, Ebo Mozarewa of the UANC had been chosen, as well as being appointed as the Minister of Combined Operations and Defense. He had formed a joint government with Ian Smith, who was Minister without portfolio. He had also tried to include other African parties who had lost the elections. The establishment of Zimbabwe-Rhodesia was met with vast negative reactions and criticisms around the world, as in relation to neighboring countries and frontline states such as Angola, Botswana, Lesotho, and a few more. They had seen it as a sellout state and had accused the black African leaders at the time, such as Sithole, Mozarewa, and Chief Jeremiah Charao, who was a signatory of the internal settlement, who did not win any seats, of supporting an illegal regime. And the Patriotic Front previously mentioned accused the three black leaders of being puppets to Rhodesia, with the Patriotic Front maintaining that they will continue to fight until they had won the war. The Organization of African Unity had issued a statement condemning any agreement that did not include the Patriotic Front. The United Kingdom and the United States, in separate statements, had reportedly said the internal settlement for Zimbabwe-Rhodesia was a step in the right direction. However, it was still insufficient, as it did not include the Patriotic Front, which included ZANU and ZAPU. This negative reception had resulted in the UN Security Council adopting a resolution, Resolution 423, which condemned the settlement as illegal, after a request being made by the group of African states within the UN. However, it should be noted that the United States, West Germany, France, and the United Kingdom abstained from the vote reportedly, which in turn leads to my next point. As previously mentioned, the international community has still not recognized Zimbabwe-Rhodesia as a legitimate country, and continued international pressure, which had moved Mozarewa to take part in negotiations at Lancaster House in late 1979. This had resulted in an agreement between the Zimbabwe-Rhodesia and British government, ZAPU, and ZANU in December 1979, in which a ceasefire was agreed upon, as well as the stipulation that the country would be returned to the United Kingdom and temporarily revert back to Southern Rhodesia so that elections could be held in 1980. And on the 18th of April 1980, Southern Rhodesia had become the independent nation of Zimbabwe, with ZANU-PF being the new ruling party, with Canaan Banana becoming the first president until 1987, although the role was traditionally ceremonial by that point, and Robert Mugabe becoming the first prime minister, with the real power being held in the title of prime minister. After the constitution was amended, the role of president was changed to be an executive role, with the position of prime minister being abolished, and Robert Mugabe succeeding to the role of president thereafter, paving the way for his rule until 2017. A final conclusion can be made that Zimbabwe has had a very complex history, and a lot has happened in the history of the country, which has gone through many transitions, even before colonialism, which will be covered more on the channel, that has shaped its history. If you had enjoyed the video, please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this, and watch out for the next video that will be covering the entire history of Rhodesia. So please do stay tuned for that, and have a great day.